A controversial promise from Pierre Poilievre is drawing sharp criticism from his rivals. The Conservative leader says he'd use the notwithstanding clause to override the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and ensure people convicted of multiple murders stay in prison for life.
The worst mass murderers should never be allowed back on our streets. For them, a life sentence should mean what it says, a life sentence. They should only come out in a box.
The federal government has never invoked the notwithstanding clause. Currently, anyone convicted of first-degree murder in Canada is eligible to apply for parole after serving 25 years. Let's go to Rafi Boudjikanian. He is in Montreal. And Rafi, take us through the announcement.
Ian, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre harkened back not only to that horrible mass shooting in Quebec City at a mosque 8 years ago that saw 6 people killed, but also to the conviction the perpetrator received. 2 life sentences with parole eligibility in 25 years. Now that's because the Supreme Court struck down a Stephen Harper-era law that allowed judges to convict multiple murderers of multiple consecutive life sentences. Here's what Poilievre had to say about that.
That works out to 4 years of jail time for every murder he committed. Think about that for a second. What happened to the principle of proportionality? You get 4 years behind bars for taking the life of another human being? This is insane.
So Poilievre is saying not only would he bring that law back, he would also use the notwithstanding clause to prevent any judges from striking it down again.
And so, Rafi, what's the opposition saying?
Well, the notwithstanding clause has come up a couple of times on this campaign. It certainly has not been dominant as an issue, but the Liberals, for example, have said that they're concerned with how often provinces are using it to override charter rights and saying that they would challenge the province of Quebec using it to defend its controversial language protection or secularism laws. And conversely, you've had the Bloc Québécois saying that no federal government should get in the way of provinces using the notwithstanding clause on their own turf. Now, with today's announcement, what the Conservatives have done is actually unite everyone else in opposition against them.
We have a Charter of Rights and Fundamental Freedoms in this country, and it's the responsibility, in my view, of the Prime Minister, of the Government of Canada to defend that charter.
Charter rights, human rights should not be things that we are willing to ignore or put to the side. And I'm worried that it's becoming more and more commonplace that the notwithstanding clause is being used.
When you are in the position of a person that wants to be Prime Minister of Canada, you should rely more on improving justice system and laws than removing yourself from their application.
Those 4 parties and the Greens will be in Montreal midweek for those French and English language debates, Ian.
All right, Rafi, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, let's get some analysis on this from a criminal law expert who says Poilievre's plan sets a, quote, horrific precedent. Peter Sankoff is lead counsel at Sankoff Criminal Law. He's also a professor at the University of Alberta's Faculty of Law, and he joins us today from Calgary. So Peter, first of all, explain to us why you feel it's so significant that Pierre Poilievre, who hopes to be Prime Minister, would suggest invoking the notwithstanding clause to achieve his goals here.
Well, I mean, there's the precedent of invoking the notwithstanding clause against criminal offenders, which has never been done in this country. So I think right off it sets a bad precedent in that sense and opens the door to sort of, all sorts of policies that might circumvent the charter when, as Mr. Blanchet pointed out in the opening, there's just no reason to do that. It's much easier to comply and adapt the law in a way that's more effective. I think in this case, I would say that Mr. Poilievre's, suggestion is half-baked, but it's really kind of quarter-baked. It's like this is about the least important thing I can think of that needs rectifying in the criminal justice system. And this seems to be sort of pandering to a crime and punishment type of idea more than anything else.
Okay, so let's talk about the problem that he appears to want to address. And let's go back to 2022. The Supreme Court of Canada said the use of consecutive periods of parole ineligibility for people convicted of multiple murders violated the charter. So in other words, somebody murders 6 people, and the judge says that the ineligibility for parole will be 6 times 25, and the Supreme Court of Canada says, no, you can't do this. Why not?
So the basic idea is that it's a bad idea to hamstring what we're going to do in the future. The basic idea is, first of all, like the idea Mr. Poilievre is suggesting that it's 25-year punishment and 4 years for each murder is nonsensical. It is a life imprisonment. That's what the term is. And most people who murder 6 people are never going to be released from prison. That is just not a realistic appraisal of the situation. But what the Supreme Court said is we can't forecast what any individual offender is going to look like. And you're talking about sometimes these multiple murders, and I'm not trying to minimize them. They are grave, horrific things. But we're talking about sometimes these offenders do this at 18, 19, even younger. And they are sentenced, you're essentially sentencing them to the rest of their natural born life. And the Supreme Court said that just goes too far for a country that believes in this idea of rehabilitation. And many times these people will change their entire life in 25 years. And the idea that you need to put that off indefinitely, 50, 75 years, is just contrary to Canadian values. And that's what the Supreme Court said, and I agree with them.
You know, though, some people listening to that, maybe they're not watching CBC, I don't know, but some people listening to that are going to go, there's a bleeding heart liberal law professor. You know, if somebody is going to murder 5 people, somebody's going to murder 1 person, they should be thrown in prison and the key thrown away. And so why are you defending them?
And thankfully, those people don't decide justice matters in the country any more than I do. Like, the judges who decide these things have to weigh all the different perspectives at play here. The idea that you can just throw them away, you know, put them away and throw away the key, it's a nice idea. It's not a very sound justice philosophy. It's once you start tinkering with these sorts of things, you're left with, you know, a real inhumane system of justice. This is cruel and unusual punishment that the Supreme Court found that Mr. Poilievre seems to want to entrench. And if I just may say one more thing, this idea of using the notwithstanding clause seems to me to be particularly inapt to this situation, because that has to be renewed every 5 years. It's going to be multiple governments that will have to keep this person in place by renewing the notwithstanding clause, because I'm pretty confident that it can be challenged any time it lapses after a 5-year period.
You know, when the charter came into effect with the notwithstanding clause, the understanding at that point was that governments would be loath to ever use it because the public would place such a high expectation that it only be used in the most, absolutely necessary cases. One last question. We have less than a minute for the answer. But how do you feel about where we're at as a society now when it comes to the way people regard the notwithstanding clause?
I mean, I think there is a use for the notwithstanding clause. I'm not against it in every situation. And I think that it is an interesting debate to have for democratic governments to say we want to reverse these things in appropriate circumstances. It's just that this one is particularly inapt, simply because a sentencing provision that's going to take place over 50 years is going to need 10 uses of the notwithstanding clause to maintain it. There are situations where there are emergencies or something that needs to be decided by a democratic government. That's a different situation. But I think we're in a place where we need to be constantly rethinking, is this the right use for this particularly exceptional clause?
Peter Sankoff, really nice having your perspective on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Peter Sankoff is a criminal defense lawyer and lead counsel at Sankoff Criminal Law, also a professor at the University of Alberta's Faculty of Law. He joined us today, though, from Calgary.